Okay, so let me move on to introducing tonight's speaker, Dr. Dale Meyerrose. Dr. Meyerrose is an international preeminent technology and cybersecurity strategist. He has more than 4 decades of combined public, private, and academic leadership experience, and he regularly consults with business, government, and academic organizations. Dr. Meyerrose was the first president-appointed U.S. Senate-confirmed Chief Information Officer for the U.S. intelligence community when it reorganized in 2005. He spent over 30 years forging a career in the U.S. Air Force. While on active duty, he served as Chief Information Officer for 7 major military commands. As a cybersecurity pioneer, he has been instrumental in creating terminology and processes for defending critical networks that are foundational Department of Defense cyber disciplines, U.S. government, and tech industry. Dr. Meyerrose had major leadership roles against the early cyber attacks on government networks, creation of the early cybersecurity response centers, and developing the first ever Homeland Defense architectures for the nation in the wake of the attacks of September 11th. He's chairman of the board and president for both IMCOM International and Rural 5G, and chairman of the board for Rancher Government Solutions. He is an adjunct professor for Carnegie Mellon University, where he's the director of one of the very few cybersecurity leadership certificate programs in the country, and an adjunct professor at the United States Air Force. He's a trustee and the treasurer for the U.S. Air Force Academy Falcon Foundation, and sits on multiple corporate advisory boards. Please help me to welcome Dr. Dale Meyerrose.
Evening. I thought Karen did a great job and it was worth $20, don't you think? You know, if we'll pardon me just for a minute, we'll see how good I am at technology. I'll get some things turned on here, maybe. Just thinking about it. You know how that thing spins around. Oh, by the way, you know, I still do have a grudge against Karen. She didn't tell me that I'd have a roommate here and people that knew me. I normally only speak to groups that either don't know me or I'm positive don't know more than I already know about my subject. And get my clicker going here, maybe. It's one of those things where you got to do the battery in and out. So I would tell you some jokes, but I don't have any that I can tell in this crowd. However, I do have a lot of experience speaking, and you notice I'm hand holding the mic. That's because several years ago, somebody put a lapel mic on me, and I said, okay, you're not going to turn it on till I get on stage, right? Yeah, not a problem, sir, not a problem. So I go to the restroom. It didn't embarrass me, but the guy next to me, I think, was pretty embarrassed when we got back to the room. Okay, so we'll see if I can get this to work, maybe. Maybe not. Okay. Hang on just a second. I don't have time for the ON-OFF button. There we go. How about that? We're already done. Again, I'm really happy to be here talking about something that I'm pretty passionate about, and you'll probably figure that out. Okay, everybody raise your hand. Okay, put them down. Okay, now you've been trained for the Q&A part. Does anybody need to be retrained? Okay. I speak to a lot of audiences, not as many as I used to, but I speak to a lot of technical audiences. And I'm told that I'm very condescending about what we do in the technology business. And it's because I break it down into such basics that they say, it makes it sound like we don't do anything. I said, well, yeah, okay. All right, now my college students, I can't do metaphors or analogies because they're not educated enough. But in any event, it's kind of like golf. Golf is only two things, force and vector. That's all it is. Now, it's hard to do that, right, Hans? But it's force and vector. And that's how far we're going to break down AI, and then we're going to talk about it, because I think if we end up with some basics, we'll have a better opportunity of when you hear something new about AI, you can reflect back and say, okay, take a step back, what's the context, take a step forward, and figure out what you want to talk about. Information is very, very hard to get. So for several years, I taught the research course for the graduates at Carnegie Mellon. If you ever teach at a university or whatever, you don't ever want to teach a core course, because that means that every single student has to take it, and half of them don't want to be there. And I'm sure some of you have been in academia and you understand what my point is. But my point to them is, it's very hard to take things at face value anymore. There's so much information out there, sorting out, is this good information, not good information, or whatever. And so my rule of thumb is, if this is important to me, I'm going to figure out what's the source, what's the reference, and who's paying the money for the information. Right? Because it is true. I have worked on several grant committees and in fact been awarded some grants, and this cartoon is too painfully true. And so you gotta be on guard, and if it's important enough to you, dig in a little bit, and it doesn't take very much to dig in. So don't be afraid to challenge anything that I put forward. As a matter of fact, I kind of expect it, and if I shrug my shoulders, it means I don't know. That's, just so you know. Okay, we hear a lot about AI. It's almost become a buzzword. I think it's a four-letter word. You're going to hear a lot of four-letter words from me tonight. The most prevalent four-letter word you're going to hear is data. Okay? So if you're not thinking in terms of data, you're not starting an AI conversation. So, we're going to talk through some basics. And then I'm going to talk about what my assessment of our current environment is, and then I'm going to try and give you some context about how you might analyze national and economic security priorities for our country. Good deal? Okay, AI is really simple. Very, very elementary. It's a computer programmed to do math against a data set. That's all it is. I don't care what you're talking about. I don't care what kind of AI function you're talking about. It's nothing more than that. It is not artificial. Everything about it is intentional. And it's not very smart, not very intelligent. An AI program cannot add 2 plus 2. It's not how it works. Now, if you were in my technology course 6 years ago, I would convince you that the abacus was the first AI machine. I don't do that anymore because my students don't know what an abacus is. But the definition has evolved over time. I'm not going to define it for you, even though we're going to talk about it, but you know what the definition is. It is a person who programs a computer to do math against a data set. That's all it is. Okay? It has no common sense. See, a lot of people think, by what they hear, we're going to use AI to figure out what the answer is. Athletic teams use AI to figure out, what series of plays to call and all that kind of good stuff. But it's only as good as the data set that was trained against. It cannot reach out of its training mechanism, and it cannot reach beyond the data that it has access to. Pure and simple. Okay? if you haven't figured out, I'm making the assumption that all of you can read. And if you have trouble reading, let me know. And we will go computing. No, we don't. Okay, one of the things that you ought to notice up there, a lot of people, the business about machine language, you don't even see the word machine language up there, do you? Machine language has been displaced by these 3 bullets. Nobody ever, it used to be AI and machine language, right? Like we had to modify AI with the term machine language. But now, we're more correct and we're thinking large language models, small language models. Why would you have a small language model? Maybe you've only got so much compute power and can only analyze so much data, so you need a small language model. And if you're a small company, that might be what you can afford. Okay? So that ought to stand out to you. The next thing is remember a fog. Once you understand fog, you know everything you need to know about AI. Find, organize, generate. Doesn't matter whether it's a robot, doesn't matter whether you've asked it a plain language question, doesn't matter. Just remember fog. Okay? Now you guys know what you need to know about AI. We're done. But not really. Okay? That's all valid but not sufficient. There are a lot of things that we come up against that, somebody makes a point and that's valid, but it's not sufficient for covering the subject. Okay? Because it's not really important what platform you use, what tools you use, or anything like that. It's what you do with it. What can you trust? And where are you going with it? Okay? And it doesn't matter what it is. So remember, it's not artificial, it's not intelligent, and it's a fog. AI. Again, it doesn't matter what kind of output you're looking at, but about 85% of all of the AI outputs are done by one of those mathematical relationships. And I know there's at least one person in this room got better grades in calculus than I did, but I happen to know what all those are. Again, I'm making the point. It can't reflect anything beyond its programmed algorithms and what data it is exposed to. Some of it's very complicated. And we'll talk about some of those complications. But it's not easy, it's not hard to understand the basics. Okay. Now, we're going to see if after 2 slides you guys can pick up the theme in my assessment about AI in today's environment. 2 slides. You can name that tune in 2 slides, okay? All right, let's see how well we're reading here. There's my 4-letter word again, data. Data. And in that process, you're giving up most of your Fourth Amendment rights. I think we've all given up our Fourth Amendment rights in this room, so I don't know why we're worried about the Bill of Rights. We just gave them up for a nickel off and an orange at King Soopers. Because, see, what's happened over time is the recording of data happened gradually, and now there's almost nothing you can't do that somebody's not tracking you. Okay, just so you know, the FBI spies on me, and they do it through my watch. And if you're on the golf course with me, you find that my watch talks to me when we're not talking to it. That's the FBI checking up on me. And because you're all here, you're all now in trouble. Computing, gotta be on a platform. It doesn't exist in an ether. It has to have a platform on which a programmer puts algorithms, and a platform by which either senses, receives, computes, or processes data. As in all things, how good your people are is more important than what your tools are. And how willing are we as institutions to accept things? I'll give you two examples. Let's go back to September 10th, 2001. If I told you we had a bunch of general officers in Cheyenne Mountain plotting to shoot down a civilian airplane, you would have us all arrested and jailed, wouldn't you? But on September 12th, you were willing to do it, weren't you? Okay? So how many of us are in the business? Yeah, we're in the business. And we got a meeting. You have to go to the meeting, right? After the coronavirus, it became acceptable to say, we'll join virtually, didn't it? Matter of fact, I had COVID at least 12 times. Those are the number of flights I didn't want to take when those. Don't know that I ever had it, but okay, all right, we're on the second slide. But look at my point down here. All that is not very different from all of the IT technology developments and stuff we've seen in the last 4 decades in our society. Okay, a lot of words on here you don't necessarily need to read. You can take my word that they're accurate, because Gartner tells me that they're accurate. And again, if you're in the technology business, there's this acceptance curve. You know, the hype and all that kind of good stuff that builds expectations, and then there's a trough of disappointment, and it comes back up. You know, and it's that way on almost everything in technology that we do or use. It has become a theory that has very few exceptions in our technologically led lives. Okay, can anybody figure out what the next slide's going to say down in the bottom blue box? It's going to say just like any other technology. So, what are the top challenges? Not too different from any other technology. Okay, now, the reason I happen to use this particular RAND study is, yes, I know who did it. Yes, I know what their population set was. Yes, I knew they normalized their research data. Yes, I know they set up their theorems for echelon. So anytime you see me copy something, it's because I've done the research that says I'll stand behind what is on the slide. Well, guess what? All of those things are the same problems we have with putting computers and networks and other technologies into our personal lives and business. Get the idea here about what I'm saying about AI, because we hear a lot of fear-mongering about AI. Oh, it's going to take over the world. Oh, we're going to lose all of our jobs. See, when anybody hears this, they think that they're the next elevator operator, or the next gas pump jockey that fills your car, or the next buggy whip manufacturer. We're all going to go the way of... No, we're not. And I'll give you some ideas about how I think that's going to play out. Okay, guess what? You hear all this about how great AI is and all that. Virtually all AI projects fail, just like every other IT. And this is what every CIO in the history of the United States is ever going to tell you. God, this IT stuff is hard. And that's why it fails. Okay, so I run a couple of IT companies. The only reason I run the IT companies is I can speak English and talk to human beings. True statement. Because my guys will come up and they'll go, hey boss, look what we can do. God, that's really neat. What are we going to do with it? I don't know, but it's really neat, isn't it? If we can't monetize it, we can't do it. Oh, but boss, look how neat it is. That's how they think. I know that. I've supervised their kind for the last 45 years. And so you got to keep them motivated because you want them to come up with new ideas, but you got to get them to move on beyond this really neat thing that won't sell anything. Know what I mean? So, again, you can glance through that. You can use your imagination. AI projects fail just like any other technology projects. Not all good ideas need to be pursued, and not all bad ideas fail. Okay, here's the other thing not talked about, and guess what? I'm going to hit this really big in the next section. AI is not free. Okay, now you may not be able to read it. I don't care if you can read it or not. But those are M's behind those numbers. M's, meaning millions of dollars. AI is not cheap. Nothing about it's cheap. Just like a lot of AI stuff about IT is not cheap. Oh, but I can get $11.95 subscription to ChatGPT. Yeah, you can. But what can you do with it? Outside of asking a couple questions that you can get by looking up on Wikipedia, not much.
Is that true?
Don't worry, they're making plenty of money. And we'll talk about that, by the way, in just a little bit. Just a little bit, because I'm not going to drop that. But guess what? It's not different from any other technology. It requires an infrastructure. And oh, by the way, you're going to get a word here in a little bit. It's one of the 3 or 4 words I want you to remember. It's called density. Okay, so this is very, very dense computing. Dense computing requires lots of more chips and things that, got green lights and spin around and all that other kind of good stuff. Density, we'll talk about density. Don't forget that word. When you're talking about AI, it means a lot. Okay? So it's not free. In essence, most companies who install AI infrastructures do so by completely gutting their old IT infrastructure and creating a new one. And guess what? The boards weren't ready for that. I'm on 4 boards, and somebody comes in after reading the Wall Street Journal about AI and says, "What are we doing about AI?" Okay, well, let's peel this onion back. What do you want to do with AI? Okay, so one of my very first major AI implementations had to do with the point of sale breach of 2013 and 2014. That doesn't mean anything to anybody in this audience, does it? The target breach.
The target breach.
Now, as soon as I say the target breach, everybody goes, "Oh yeah, I remember the target breach, right?" You want to know why we called it the target breach? Because it came in the 4th quarter of retail sales, and the other companies made sure that it was labeled the target breach with the newspapers. That's why it's called the target breach. When in fact it affected every big box at almost every retail company in the United States. Misinformation, never mind. In any event, I helped multiple companies go through that. We only did 3 things. That's all it took. 3 things. And again, my guys don't like it when I break it down to so simple as, boss will think it was magic and we don't do, no. It's called expense. Very expensive. We only did 3 things. Dual factor authentication. Everybody know what dual factor authentication is, right? Because you got to do it to get in your bank account, right? Segment the data. What that means is you put the data in different pots, and they're correlated by security tokens. And the last is ruthlessly upgrade all your applications. Okay, so when your iPhone's got that little circle that says 6 or 7 or whatever on the app thing, make sure it runs. And it's not just getting on an airplane to have the latest app so you can watch a movie either. Okay? That's all we did. Those 3 things. And we did it in about 6 to 7 months. And you don't hear those kinds of things about the retail industry anymore, do you? You hear other things. How did we do that? It's called a thing called RPA. Anybody ever hear of RPA? Robotic Process Administration. I don't know what the current stats are, but back then we had to get the retail companies to be able to process 4 million transactions a second. 4 million, and I can only imagine it's a lot more than that, but I don't know what it is. I try and stick with what I think I know rather than what I think I don't know. 4 million transactions a second, think about that. How many people do you need to hire to survey 4 million transactions a second, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? Impossibility, isn't it? Robotic process administration, it's AI. It's like having a digital robot doing all the auditing on a continual basis. They don't take a cigarette break. They don't have to take their kid to school. All you got to do is update their application about every 2 or 3 weeks. That works great. RPA, Robotic Process Administration. Anybody here got a bank account? I guarantee you it's done by that. No, by the way, you can't call a damn bank and get a person anyway. You got to talk to some robot. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that, but we did. Okay, for all the fear-mongering, let's remember this. How long have you guys heard about AI? I would venture to say that most of you haven't heard about AI until November 29th, 2022. ChatGPT comes out, plain language identifier, right? You could say in English, find me the number of, and it would come, right? ChatGPT. Hey Siri, yeah. But AI has been around a lot longer than that. AI has been around for decades. Now, we'll talk about tipping points here in a minute. Okay? And there they are. So when you talk to most technologists, they talk about waves of technology, of change, this is changes in technology. I don't think that's sufficient enough. Everybody know what a tipping point is, right? Everybody knows what a tipping point is. It's that point where you reach where the rest of it's inevitable, right? It's just going to continue on the path and you already know what the answer is. Okay, so these are the technology tipping points. Anybody know what the GUI tipping point in 1973 is? It was the point. Remember the old computers with the green screen? The only thing you ever got was green letters and words and all that kind of stuff. GUI, graphic user interface. That's when the pictures started showing up on your computer. That was the development of icons. Kind of an important one. Kind of a game changer. Okay, Perkin-Elmer, 1975. Anybody got any idea what that is? That's when we figured out how to put microprocessors and chips in wafers, silicon wafers. Kind of important, don't you think? A tipping point which allowed the industry to then go forward. You get my point? Guess what? I'm giving you all of the major tipping points that created AI. Because look at the very bottom, it says Gen AI 2022. Just like any other technology. See, it's not this out there, you gotta fear about it, and all those kinds of things. I mean, people that try and do that to you have got a motive of some kind, and it's usually not objective. Not that it's bad, it's just not objective. Okay, what else? All right, GPS. Everybody knows the United States Air Force, excuse me, the United States Space Force provides all of your GPS and all that kind of stuff ever since the mid-'80s, and your location is not the most important thing that GPS does for you. What's the most important thing that GPS does for you? Universal timing. It allows every system in the world to operate on a world global basis, courtesy of your United States Space Force. IP surpasses switch. Used to be switch networks, a stroke or switch, it would go tick, 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 tick. Well, the business about internet protocol passed that in terms of reliability. Now there's no such thing except in a few IoT, Internet of Things, a few IoT applications. Generated data, the iPhone, just think about it. The business about the iPhone was released on 12 June 2007. I have grandkids that have never known the world without a phone in their hand. God, that's terrible. Moore's Law. Everybody ever hear of Moore's Law? Okay, now, Pat Gelsinger, who is the head of Intel, if he were here, he and I would argue for 2 hours as whether I'm right or he's right. And of course, we know I'm right, so we can ignore him. But that's the point in time where the size of the microprocessors became close to subatomic. We're talking 2 nanometers were attained this year. 5 nanometers. Anybody know how big 5 nanometers is? It's like, 100 millionth of a centimeter or millimeter, or I don't know. It's got a lot of zeros. And that's going to be important. Density, remember, think about that. So guess what? We can make those microchips so small that on my thumbnail, we can build a microprocessor that can perform over 10 billion computer operations, and it fits on my thumbnail. Think about it. All them techies just added a bunch of zeros. Only 4 numbers are important. It depends on where the decimal point is. But in any event, RPA, you've heard of that. Virtual, augmented, machine language, Bluetooth, IPv6. Anybody know what IPv6 is? Yeah. It's what assigns your names and nomenclature and all that. It's done by Aaron, by the way. I used to be the CEO and president of Aaron. And we did the transition from IPv4 to IPv6. Guess what that did? That gave you capacity, not only for naming, but also for putting security protocols in the overhead of all of your communications. Kind of important, don't you think? I think so. Cloud, you've heard about 5G, and again, they're talking about speed and scale, right? We could not do the AI that we do today without 5G. It has to do with what the capacity is. How fast can you run it? And then, of course, we finally get to my point that says, okay, AI in 2022. Guess what? I just went through the scenario that sounds like most other technologies. My point is, during this whole thing is that AI is just another technology, has a few different parameters and capabilities, but it's nothing to be scared about. At least I think anyway. Okay, if you're in business, you're familiar with 2 symbols. The unicorn, everybody wants to be the unicorn, one of a kind, make a lot of money, and the other is the hockey stick, right? Everybody knows what the revenue hockey stick, right? You perk along, and then magic happens, and all of a sudden you make a lot of money. So that's what we're going to talk about. You hear about AI, but I don't think there's anything such as AI bias. It's just bias. Okay? And this is where it comes from. AI is not biased in the least. AI doesn't care what you think. AI doesn't care what you believe. AI only reflects the algorithm that it was programmed to do, the math that it was trained to do, and what databases it has access to. So some people think I add more and more data, and I'm going to get a better and better answer, and the answer is no. Not unless you change the algorithm. Not unless you change the training the AI went to ahead of time. Okay? Okay, you need to be starting thinking density. Remember I talked about earlier, how many billions of processes on a small chip, and where's the density of those manufactured chips? It's not the United States. Never has been. We'd like to think it is, but it isn't. So there are roughly 8,000 data centers, actually 8,123 as of 2 weeks ago, but I haven't looked lately. And I've built a few of those. I built a couple of those really big ones with your tax money. God, I hope I did a good job. Although I'm not so sure anymore. And I've built 3 for industry. Does anybody know what the biggest cost is associated with the data center? The utility bill. Okay, so when you're in government, you have to sell it. You have to sell it on the cost of the installation, which is stupid. Because the cost of the installation of a normal data center is less than 15% of the total cost of ownership of the data center. But we can't seem to get our government around that idea, but what can I say? I worked for 37 years, the United States government didn't get it changed, so I gave up. Of the data centers, 50% of all microprocessors in the world comes from a single company in Taiwan. Single company in Taiwan, 50% of it. Now, do you understand why the business about Taiwan and China and security is all of a sudden kind of an important thing, right? Okay. Now, let's talk, remember those nanometers and, the smaller I kept talking. Okay, so most microprocessors, most chips are probably in the 200 to 300 nanometer range. In terms of, I don't want to get too much into chips and strato this and all that kind of good stuff because I get mixed up and I don't want to mix anybody else up. But when it comes to the high-grade microchips, 90% of them come from 2 companies. That company in Taiwan and Samsung out of South Korea. Okay, microchips typically come in 4 versions, generally. If there's anybody in the microchip business here, they're going to argue with me, but I'm going to assume that nobody's going to argue with me. Logic, memory, single function add, mixed add. If you're not less than 10 nanomillimeters, your logic chips don't work. They're not fast enough, they don't have enough capacity. Because we're talking about 60 billion computer operations on something the size of your thumbnail. Density. The manufacturing of microchips is dense geographically. United States, you got to be careful which one, but the United States is either 4th or 5th in the world in producing microchips. And of course, as most people know, in 2022, we had this this CHIP Act or whatever. We can talk about that later. But the point is, guess who consumes over half the microprocessors in the world? The United States. We consume it. Don't produce it, we consume it. Excuse me, I said in the United States or United States-owned companies. Because not all U.S. companies do all their operations in the 50 states. Dense. Okay. Remember that business about energy. That's a T after that on gallons of fresh water. Can't be seawater because it doesn't do the cooling. Trillion gallons of fresh water a year. I built 2 data centers, got international awards because I figured out how to capture and save and reprocess water so that it was a lot less. But after 3 uses, guess what? The water loses its property and ability to cool, and you have to get rid of it. And oh, by the way, if you get rid of it 15 degrees above the normal table water temperature, you're going to kill stuff in the... You got the point. huge environmental concerns. Even if you're not, a green zealot, huge to think about. So, there are only about 12 logical places in the United States to build these big data centers. Got to be near an oil source or a petroleum source, a hydroelectric source, and a nuclear source. I can't say the company, but one of the companies, if I said the name, you'd immediately recognize it as opening up a big chip manufacturing data center, teleport, whatever, and they're building a nuclear facility right next to it. The reason I can't say anything about it, they haven't got the EPA okay to do all that kind of stuff yet. So when you hear all of these big tech companies say, we're going to be totally carbonless by 2030, they're lying to you. 2040, they're still lying to you. 2050, they're still lying to you. Which is why 2 years ago, the big companies, whose names you recognize, stopped sharing publicly what their plans were because their energy consumption did not meet their virtual signaling of their advertising of we're going to go green. So those of us in the business are watching this very closely. And if you want to hire me, I'm expensive. Electricity, electricity, electricity. Dense, dense, dense. Got it? In case you didn't remember, think dense. Okay, I already gave you most of those statistics. Pretty frightening, aren't they? Think about the economic and national security dependencies that we have. We have other economic and national security dependencies. Some of those came out during the coronavirus, right? Big ones here. Not saying any more important than those others, but very, very important, and we need to be addressing them. I'm going to go the way of the buggy whip makers, or the elevator operators, or the person that pumps gas at the gas station. It's not true. But when our people, not knowing what's happening, and not thinking through it, not being given good information, that's their immediate fear. It's present in all my companies. Because we're going to replace you, a software programmer, we're going to replace you with AI. You're a telemarketer, we're going to replace you with AI. We're going to replace you. No, it's not going to happen. There are two ways to think about workforce dynamics and AI. Two ways. The first is automation. Okay? Robots. Now, if you think robots are going to take over the world, don't raise your hands. How many have one of those robotic sweepers in your house? You ever watch one?
Oh, yeah.
It's not going to take over the world anytime soon. Okay, I already gave you one of the perfect examples of automation. Instead of hiring 4 billion people to look at incoming data logs, robotic process administration takes care of 4 million, or whatever the current number is, credit card transactions a year, or a second. You could only do that through an automation process. Things like that are what are going to be automated. And we've experienced a lot of that. Some of it's successful, some of it not successful. You know, the business about toll booth takers. There's still a few around the United States, but by and large, they've kind of gone away, haven't they? Things like that are the types of work processes that are good for automation. Can you diagram the process? Can you create binary computer language yes or no conditions for this, that, or the other thing? You know, do you have a sensor, a processor, a collector? You know, that's mostly the Internet of Things. When you hear the Internet of Things, that's what I think about, the Internet of Things. It is a machine generating data for another machine's consumption. Okay, so that's one way in which AI will have an impact on our workforce. The second is augmentation. Okay, now you can think about ChatGPT. Okay, so I'm an analyst. Go out and find all the data points relative to the project I'm working on, or whatever. I am an artist. I'm an automation artist, and again, I used to consult for the company that runs the largest video game in the world. Anybody know what it is? First of all, only 12% of its users are in North America. League of Legends. League of Legends has 280 million players. Think about it. I was in Seoul, South Korea, and saw the international championship, and the dude that won walked away with $40 million for playing the damn video game. Boy, did I pick the wrong business. Augmentation. The thing about AI, when you've got a microprocessor that can do billions of operations, that is a speed and scale that a human cannot match. However, remember way back when we were talking about the basics, it has no common sense, and it can't reach outside of what it's been trained on, or its data set, or how its algorithms are set up. So these are functions that require a human. All right, so you've heard about the digital twin, right? Everybody hear about the digital twin. We're all going to have digital twins, and we can say, find this, or find that, or whatever. It's kind of along those lines. Okay? Now, in IT, we're all used to the system administrator, the sysad, right? They've got all kinds of things that they can do. They're a big user. And who would we call to say, our computer doesn't work, or I can't get this to work, or whatever we call her, sysadmin, if you're working in a company or whatever. And they were what we considered power users. Power users use applications that most normal people don't use. That's their job. Their job has something to do with technology, or the production of stuff, or whatever. And then there's the rest of us. All right? Well, guess what? The same pattern that followed the IT business, and whether or not we were a power user, notice I call it an average user. Most of us are probably less than average, but in any event, the average user that has a certain number of functions you do, email, word administration, spell check, those kinds of things. Creating slide, doing functions that help your job, but your job is not centered around IT or AI or whatever. That's where AI is starting to come in, and that's where most of the business cases are coming in. And I'll show you where those business cases are coming in when it comes to corporate America. Corporate America. This is where you find them working on AI and adapting them in the business of doing business. Most of them, they think, this is where I want to go. I start small. I figure I learn a little bit. I create a journey that takes me to a destination. You put it in your business plan or your strategic plan. That's what businesses are typically doing. That's what boards typically grade you on. Are you following your business plan? What are your metrics for success? What's your ROI for the expenditure? That's AI. AI does the same thing. Digital systems, I've talked about, use it a lot all right, now, you're going to see a lot of studies that say that, we had this AI program, and we tried to put it in the legal profession, and it had 75% errors. Guess who paid for the study? The legal unions paid for the study. Of course, it's got to have 75 errors. Or the business, you can go in the healthcare business and the same thing. So you got to be careful. Remember what I said? Lies start out with. Recent studies say most of them aren't really studies. Most of them are selected surveys using selected data points. And some of the data points and some of the things that we all believe are actually made up data points, but we don't need to get into that unless you have questions. Process augmentation, RPA. See, you know, 4-letter words, data, RPA's 4-letter word, density's 4-letter word, AI 4-letter word. They're all linked. They're simple concepts, but how you put them together is important about how you think about it. Anybody know where the best AI laboratories are for the United States government? It's called Ukraine and Gaza.
Oh, no.
Yep. Called Ukraine and Gaza. We don't like to think of it in those terms, but guess what? That's where the business about drones and asymmetric warfare and things like that are being carried out in Ukraine and Gaza. And unfortunately, there are companies around the world that this is really a good opportunity. You know, overlooking the fact that tens of thousands of people are getting killed and millions of people are lives are disrupted. That's not their concern. It's the business about learning, what does this do? How does it do it? Okay, and so like in the Air Force, it's affecting how many manned aircraft we buy, because, oh, by the way, there are things called drone swarms. The Air Force doesn't, drone is a 4-letter word of the Air Force. It's called unpiloted vehicles, or unpiloted aircraft, or whatever. But drone swarms take down expensive airplanes. So, those are the areas in the government that are currently being worked, and I think you guys can figure that out based upon the things I've said. I have about 5 minutes, or longer if I speak longer, for questions.
Oh, we have like 15 minutes for questions.
Oh, 15. Well, she only held up 5 up there, so, and you know, she didn't know me well enough that I usually ignore what I'm told, so. Can I answer any questions? Again, I don't intend to mock or degrade or tell somebody that, you know, AI is not complicated, because it is. But when you boil it down, it really isn't. Yes, sir.
So can I just make one announcement
Yes,
before,
ma'am.
and then I'm going to hand this over. We will walk the microphone around as we usually do. We're going to try something new tonight. I did a little research, and I understand that the best questions for a Q&A are 10 words or less, and we're going to give you 15 words, okay? No personal stories, all of that kind of thing. So I'm not going to hold this right.
I have a question here, and then I've got one right here in front of me. Yes, sir.
What happens if we lose TASC in Taiwan?
That's a good question, and the question is timing. Okay, so if we lose it in the near term, it's really going to be quickly. Okay, so I would tell you that particularly in Europe and the Netherlands and the Benelux area, they are building like crazy to create foundries. Foundries, by the way, is the word that tech people use when they make tech stuff. So if it happens a year or 2 years from now, problem's not as bad. Problem's bad, but problem's not as bad. Again, you're looking at the trajectory of manufacturing, you know, and where is it going? Oh, by the way, that one company used to make 75% 3 years ago. So now it's down to only 60%. And it's not just mini processors. It is what's their capacity, what they can do. Logic microprocessors need the highest tech chips. The others can get by with lower tech, cheaper to make, faster to make, less silicon wafer slices, you know. But you get my point. So that's why national security interest in Taiwan is so great, probably for the next 5 years. You were next with your question. Yeah. Then I'll come this way. Yes, ma'am.
Best practices for a business assessing risk of using AI in listening to meetings, taking notes, all these really easy enabling functions, but the data is going somewhere.
It's going to the cloud, you know. And depending upon the contract that your company has with its IT providers, notice I said providers, depends upon your control and recovery of that data. Okay, so if you just use Google Meet or FaceTime or whatever, it goes to their cloud. And you know, you don't pay your monthly fee, it goes bye-bye. Again, contracting is really, really important. The government's not very good at it, is why they took government is 10 years behind the rest of the country on adopting cloud. But it's what does your contract say? Is it recoverable? What does it take to recover? What kind of structure do you get it in a download on the back end? Because that determines what parameters your new provider uses. Get advice, pay for it. Okay? All right, I have a question right here. Sir.
Yeah, 15 words.
There's two. No, it's not my limit.
I was struck when you mentioned that I know water can be reused in foundries, but you say it can only be reused.
So many times, and then it loses its cooling properties. And it has to do with the covalence of this, that, and the other thing.
Oh, now I understand.
Yeah.
But why is it then that Phoenix is a big hotbed of existing foundries and new ones?
Really easy answer. The easy answer is Phoenix sits on the largest aquifer in North America.
There it goes.
Okay, all right, just so you know, kind of what we're talking about, one of those 12 places to really build lots of good stuff is up in the Northwest on the Snake and Columbia River Basin. Okay, so we've got a whole bunch of them up there. Do you know that we've lowered the water table 6 feet in the entire basin? Anyway, sir.
So in 2022, you talked about what the last big enabling event was LLMs and SLMs. What's the next explosive or large gateway enabling event going to be?
Don't you see what that says there? It says that experts are no more effective at predictions than dart-throwing chimpanzees. But I'll attempt to answer your question.
Please throw the dart.
Yeah, throw the dart. And oh, by the way, Phil Tetlock, he wrote The Corner Office. He, super, surveyor, all that kind of good stuff. Phil Tetlock, his books are worth reading if you're interested in those kinds of things. So I think that in part we will determine what we allow is the next best. People are putting the kibosh on property rights and building, using other people's stuff and things like that. So I think the biggest area that's going to be the next developing thing is in robotics. And I say that as a farm boy. Many of you are probably not associated with farms anymore. We still have family farms, and the Thompson brothers still do the Meyerrose farms, as do the Breedlows. And they've been using driverless tractors for years. So the automation stuff associated with agriculture, because think about it, at the turn of the 1900s, 40% of all workers were agro workers. And as of last year, 2% of our people are agro workers. And oh, by the way, we produce more this, that, and the other thing. Agriculture is associated with immigration issues, associated with all kinds of other people, union kinds of issues. And I consulted for the agribusiness for 3 years. And so the business about the automation in our food source and food chain, I think will probably be the next tsunami of changes. Personal opinion. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so what will the future trend of AI competition be like between US and China during the Donald Trump's presidency?
Oh, God.
Dr. Meyerrose, this is one of our high school students.
Okay, so she asked what I thought the future of trade or relations between China and the United States would be in a Donald Trump presidency. Okay? Well, I think it is fair, and there are a lot of things that we know. For the first time since 1892, we've got a good idea about what the new president's going to do. Okay, 1892 was the last time we re-elected a president separate from his first term. The guy's name was Grover Cleveland. And if you look historically, Grover Cleveland carried forth many of the same things that Grover Cleveland did in his first term, which undid Benjamin Harrison's stuff that he did. You learn about that in Indiana government when you're a Hoosier, because Benjamin Harrison is the only president elected from Indiana. But that's neither here nor there. So this is my speculation. Okay, most people in our country have a tendency to listen too close to words. President Trump, during his, I'll give you a good example. Okay? Trump hates NATO, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He hates NATO. He's going to get us out of NATO, right? He didn't. He had no intention of ever getting us out of NATO. What was his intention?
Get the bills.
Make it 2%. You're exactly right, Hans. 2%. To get, and everybody except two countries, ponied up to 2%. A couple of them falling back now or whatever. So the business of, the way he thinks the art of the deal is I have a negotiating position, and I want to get it to a final thing. The other thing he says I think is important that a lot of other people aren't willing to say is he wants to have a personal relationship with senior leaders around the world. Okay? So, and we tend to paint, certain senior leaders around the world as being evil. They're to be hated. They're to whatever. Actually, I kind of want my senior leadership to have a relationship with other leaders around the world so we don't start World War III. So we don't have a misreading of intentions. So we don't have, and so I speculate that when Mr. Trump gets in, you will see him with bombacity talk about this, that, or the other thing, and then come up with a decent relationship, with President Xi. Now, if you know anything about the history, you know that President Xi is on this side of that curve because they change out leaders every 15 years. His 15 years is about up. So guess what? There's a new relationship to be established, and I'll bet you that President Trump has to start all over again in that relationship because of a new leader. Is that new leader going to be in the Xi or Jinping pattern, of high profile or low, right? It's very, and so that's very dependent upon what the senior leaders do. All right? Again, speculation. You hear, okay, he's going to pull the plug on Ukraine. Ukraine's going to all go to Russia, right?
Yep.
Well, have you heard the recent things of the Ukrainian president has said lately? He's very encouraged by what he hears. I think, I don't know what the outcome's going to be, but that's how our incoming president approaches solving those kind of international problems. And just because he has a stated position doesn't mean that's where he expects to end up. That's what I think. Does that answer your question? You bet. Another question.
So our question is, assuming our world evolve and sprout arms, legs, and a tail,
Okay?
and become a little bit more cognizant of the world around them,
Mm-hmm.
do you see our world becoming more slothful?
Slothful. Okay, good.
My question was, how would you address fears that, developing AI more will lead to, sloth and intellectual degradation system?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. I really do. Okay, so in essence, the question is AI going to make us dumber? I mean, I kind of got that right? Okay. She, in my opinion, she just hit on it. Okay? Lazy. All right. I balance a checkbook. Everybody else balance a checkbook? What do? You pull out a calculator, right? Guess what? I used to do those figures in my head, but over time I've gotten out of habit. So I have daughters and granddaughters. How did you ever find your way in the world without GPS? Well, we have a map. Yeah. Well, how many people know how to use a map nowadays? I mean, I used to live by a map, and I have a hard time using a map, right? I think her comment about it makes you lazy mentally is appropriate. Okay, now, here's a bit more of my personal philosophy. There's some things I don't care about, and I don't mind being lazy about. There are other things I care a lot about, and I don't want to be lazy about. Okay? The problem is you need to really be self-aware. And that's hard for a lot of us. You know, particularly, I don't want to say bad things about younger generations or whatever, but in their mind, if it doesn't get posted on social media, it didn't happen. Now, you're giving up more of your Fourth Amendment rights, but nobody seems to know what the Fourth Amendment is anymore. But when it comes to the elements that are important to you in your professional life or your personal life, recognize when something is helping you become lazy, or it's just helping you devote more time to what you think is important. Sometimes that's family time, you know. You don't have to get in a horse and buggy and take you all morning to get 25 miles. You know, you can get there in 15 minutes. Okay? Well, the business about you know, I can have robotics do this or do that for me, or you know, how are you taking care of your health? When you get older, when you get as old as I am, you find out that mobility is the key to life. Can I walk? Can I go up a set of stairs? Can I, you know? And so if you, in fact, use robotics and your muscles atrophy and you're not mobile and things like that, it deteriorates your health. So the business about self-aware, I think it has more to do with lazy, less to do with dumb. Okay?
We've got time for one more question.
Do we have time for my answer as well? Okay, I'll take two of them and I'll make a short answer. Yes, ma'am.
How would you compare the resources used by AI with the resources used by Bitcoin?
Ooh, great question. Question is, how do you compare the resources used by AI versus those by Bitcoin? Okay, so the consuming resource for Bitcoin is computer space because it uses blockchain. Don't gloss over about blockchain. What that means is it is an audit trail which keeps track of everything that happens to that piece of data during its entire lifetime. And so Bitcoin, all right, so let's say we want to blockchain or Bitcoin all of those transactions of 4 million credit card transactions a second. Impossible, can't do it. Why? Because only about, right now, I'll be wrong with my number, but you get the idea, you can do about 400 or 500 globally in a second. That's it. Okay, so the biggest consumer of Bitcoin has to be with computer space and storage, not logic, computer space and storage. AI is more consuming of infrastructure kinds of things. Bitcoin is more consuming of in-item, server, computer. You get the distinction. The infrastructure being electricity, water, serve, you know, the things that support that. Okay, so that's the resource consumption for AI. If that makes sense, I hope it did. I had a question. Yes, sir. You had a question.
Sir, General, I was going to talk to you about
U.S. Energy policy.
Sure.
Okay, and any changes to U.S. energy policy or pending changes in policy that, and the implications to, the expanded use of atomic energy to meet these growing, energy demands that you're referencing?
Okay, you need to talk to that gentleman right there. He wrote an editorial for the Gazette. What was it, only 2 years ago? Something like that, about micro-nuclear reactors. And I was referring to those when I said that there are a couple of big box companies, when they're building their server farms, they're putting micro-nuclear reactors next to it. But let me draw upon your larger energy question. It depends on your worldview. Okay, if you're someone that believes, particularly like the extremists of the environmental folks that say that we're going to kill ourselves in 10 years or something like that, there's just no hope. Just give up. If you believe, if you're someone who believes that nothing we ever do has any impact on the earth, neither one of those are correct. I happen to believe that we're at an inflection point to where we need the cheapest amount of energy we can get. And I really don't care where it comes from. I'm an all-source energy person. And even if I weren't, that general equation is not going to change for the next 50 years. Doesn't matter what everybody says about the world's going to end in 2030 or we're going to be, carbonless or whatever. They're not going to be carbon. The only way they're going to be carbon is if they kill themselves. Because every exhale you do is carbon dioxide.
Exactly.
Yeah. By the way, carbon dioxide is a trace gas in the atmosphere. It's like 0.004% of the Earth's atmosphere. But in any event, I'm an all-source energy. Energy does more to eradicate human suffering and illness and poorness in the world than anything else. Because if you have sources of energy, you can do other things. And so I'm an all-source energy person. I'm the kind of person that believes that you make it as clean as you can. There are certain standards there that can make anything clean. But I'm also one that believes that the market ought to be the primary determinant because people's own self-interest is the only way capitalism works. So that's what I think.
Last question,
Sir.
right over here.
Yes, sir.
You said something that you thought farming would be the next really big.
The agri business, which
Agribusiness.
includes farming, food supply, all that.
How does that compare to health care issues? I see that as a huge opportunity for AI.
It is already a huge opportunity, but it's hit all kinds of roadblocks. It's called doctors and nurses. Here's the thing. You got to go back to my original slide. It says AI has no common sense. Doctors and nurses largely have common sense. So we're in the healthcare industry, and I consulted for them for 2 years. And by the way, my doctoral thesis was on IT and healthcare, telemedicine. The thing where it is most helpful has to do with research, hunting for information. The business about I need 500 simulations of this before I get a certain level of confidence that this is going to work this way every time. That's where AI is really good. Now, every study I've seen, they're all suspect. In the healthcare business, that says that AI misdiagnosed, there's a 75%. The lawyers say it doesn't do it 75%. The doctors say it doesn't do it 75%. The manufacturers say it doesn't. You kind of get the idea. They've all heard the 75% number and think it's convincing. But it is making a big difference in research, just like in the government, options and research and data collection and things like that. But there is a level beyond which we've not been able to train those algorithms to do sorting out. For instance, father and father. AI cannot differentiate between father and father. Father the noun, father the verb. So it cannot differentiate, some words, are adjectives, nouns, verbs, and adverbs. Like corner. Like, a whole bunch of words. AI we've not been able, it doesn't differentiate, it recognizes corner and applies it to whatever search it's doing. Well, that's really good because it can speed up your search for various combinations, most of which won't work. Why? Because the algorithm didn't take into account the entire knowledge of the medical profession. Okay? It only does what it's trained to do. And they're doing a lot of it. So the business about simulating medicines, the business about looking for combinations for medicines and things like that is where AI is currently doing huge things, but they've run into a roadblock. It's not progressed enough to where they can do diagnosis. It's not progressed enough to, first of all, you gotta put some kind of algorithm in there for the insurance payments. and so there are other aspects about the healthcare that AI is not able to do. Scheduling of patients, answering patient calls, and doing research in healthcare medicine is where AI has already reached, at least with the current level of technology, where it's going to be. It's reached a plateau, and I think it'll stay on that plateau for a little bit. Okay? Did I answer your question? Ladies and gentlemen, I think I've taken everybody's attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise. We have a small gift for you. I hope you can find good use for it.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.